Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Fireside Marketing Chat with Joseph. Joseph is joining us from New York. He is a marketer at Warner Brothers Discovery. He received his BA in television and media arts from Rutgers, and then later did his MFA in creative writing from the University of Texas. As a media professional, his work has been seen on networks including HBO, CNN, NBC, VH1, and Lifetime. He's also a writer, and his book, I'm Never Fine, which is going to be out next month, is one of the most anticipated books on BuzzFeed's LGBTQ plus list. So, Joseph, thank you so much for joining us today. We're very excited to hear from you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. So this is going to be in an interview format. I'll be asking some questions about marketing, about your career journey, and then we will leave some time open at the end for Q&A.
Sure.
Awesome. Great. So Joseph, why don't we start by hearing about your career journey? How did you become a writer and a marketer at Warner Brothers?
So as you mentioned, I got my BA from Rutgers University in television and media arts. And then after I graduated in 2008, I actually kind of ran away with the circus for a couple of years. I actually moved down to Florida and worked for Walt Disney World, which is a fireside chat in and of itself. So we won't go into too much detail there, but I moved back up north around 2012 and, sort of got back on track, realized that I wanted to get into media. And so started applying around to any of the big media companies in Manhattan. And I got lucky enough to get brought in for an interview with A&E Networks, which is their flagship networks are A&E, Lifetime, and History. They also own Iceland, FYI, and a couple other smaller nets. I was actually brought in for a role in ad sales, which wasn't exactly what I wanted to do, but I figured the experience and the exposure would be incredibly helpful, as well as getting my foot in the door at a pretty big media company. So I worked in ad sales for about a year or two, and that's how I came to discover the integrated marketing team, which was something I was not familiar with at all before I started working in media, but really came to develop an appreciation for what they did. I loved that it was this really great mix of strategy and creativity. So after a little bit of time, I was able to sort of weasel my way into that group. I was working on sort of the production arm of their team. So we would work on, partnership pitches that lent themselves to creating custom content. And if those got sold through, then we'd be responsible for really the whole production process. After a few years, I was really hoping to own more of like the holistic partnership marketing process. So I got lucky enough to be brought on to the unscripted network partnerships team over at NBC Universal. So there I worked across some of their biggest unscripted property shows like America's Got Talent, American Ninja Warrior, some of the newer shows that came out of their alternative studio like J-Lo's World of Dance, Making It with Amy Poehler and Nick Offerman. And we were in charge of everything, sort of the soup to nuts process. So everything from development, which is, creating pitches and proposals, to execution of marketing campaigns if and when they sold through. I left in 2018 because I was approaching my thesis year. I had decided to foolishly go back to school while working full-time concurrently, and then realized in 2018 I kind of had to focus on one thing. So took a step back, focused on finishing up my thesis, which I finished up in 2019. And then some silly little pandemic happened. And so I spent a couple of years freelancing, working for several different publishing houses while, figuring out what I wanted my next big career step to be. And in 2021, I was lucky enough to land myself at what was then Warner Media on the portfolio marketing solutions team. And we recently just became Warner Brothers Discovery at the tail end of last year when Warner Media and Discovery merged into one company. And so that is where I find myself today.
Wow, amazing. So it sounds like media, entertainment, television has been a part of your life since the get-go. We do have a few seniors on this call, so I guess something that they would also like to know is how you decided on your graduate degree. Like, how did you decide that you wanted to do an MFA, and how did that factor into, your role right now?
So I decided that I want to go to well, I'll say this. If you want to go to grad school, if you truly want to pursue a master's or any sort of like secondary degree, make sure you know what you want to do and make sure that you want to do it. Because especially if you plan to do it like I did several years later while working full time, it will basically eat up every possible minute and second of spare time that you have. But I knew at some point that I wanted to go for my graduate degree. I wasn't really sure what discipline, but it was actually through those first few years working in marketing when I had the opportunity to lean on my writing skills that I would get some pretty positive feedback from people. And at the time, I never really considered myself to be, you know, particularly talented, but I don't think that most people see their talent. I think unfortunately a lot of times we rely on external validation for stuff like that. But because of the feedback that I was getting, I began to think to myself, like, this is something that I'd like to pursue. Writing is, there is a pretty large writing component to what we do in the integrated marketing field. And I knew that, if I were to pursue the MFA, I would get to not only develop develop that talent that I could apply in a myriad of ways, but I could also apply it to my full-time career as well. So it felt like a skill to me that was worth developing, that was worth devoting the time and the energy and the you know the intermittent panic attacks to fleshing out and seeing where it took me. So yeah, it was a decision that took me a few years to come to, but when I finally arrived at that decision, I knew that it was the right one. And, I sort of just jumped in and fed myself to the sharks.
Awesome. So it sounds like your current role does have a lot of creative aspect in it. Like marketing can be really data heavy, but it can also be really creative. So I'm wondering, like, where, like, do you find that intersection in your role, or is it fully creative? Or if you could just like walk us through a day in your life as a marketer at Warner Brothers.
Sure. Well, there are so many different kinds of marketing. What I specifically do is called integrated marketing. It has several names. Some media companies will refer to it as partnerships. Some media companies will refer to it as creative partnerships or client solutions. But at the end of the day, it is integrated marketing. And what that essentially means is, as media consumers, you guys are, keenly aware that the sort of traditional commercial advertisement is becoming more and more skippable, with the advent of streaming TV and, the ability to basically record and fast forward through nearly everything. That ad space that exists between, blocks of content, people tend to tune out. We have 1,000 screens that we can look at. It's not, as engaging. We're not as forced to watch it as much anymore. So because of this, there are brands and clients out there that are looking for, new and different ways to get their message out to the people that they are looking to reach. And one of those ways is integrated marketing. And that is essentially what it sounds like: finding ways to integrate clients, their messaging, their product, what have you, into the actual meat of the show that people are watching, and or creating content that can live as an extension of that show. So what we do is sort of twofold. Part of what I do is proactive. And so we work within our company to build out initiatives that we can take out to market. So for instance, let's say that there is a superhero movie coming out next year, and said superhero is from the ocean. We won't mention his name. We will work with the various teams within Warner Brothers Discovery to figure out how can we support this theatrical release across our network ecosystem. So what can we do perhaps on Discovery during Shark Week? That might be like a really great way to support Ocean Man, we'll call him. What can we do on Food Network? What can we do on TBS or TNT? Like maybe we can do stacked marathons of DC programming. What are we going to do in real life? Like what are we going to do at Comic-Con? Are we going to have a presence there? Is there a way that we can partner with a brand to do something cool experientially? So one of our roles is, again, to like work within our teams, our leads, and put together these large initiatives that will surround the company's priorities. And then we'll take that out and we'll pitch it to clients that we feel, we feel that the initiative aligns with, their vibe, their voice, what they're looking to do. The second half of what we do is reactive. So we will receive what's called an RFP, or a request for a proposal. A client will come to us. This RFP will basically include everything that, what their plan is for the next year. Are they trying to shift the perception of their brand? How so? Who are they looking to reach? What's their, do they have a tagline or a message? Is there a specific product that they're looking to push? How are they looking to do it? Are they looking to do it digitally? What kind of budget do they have behind this? And so we take all of that information, we distill it, and we figure out, okay, does this make sense on our networks? If so, where amongst our networks does it make sense? And once we identify those properties that we feel align with their timing and their budget and their vibe, and we feel like we can actually partner with them in a way that feels authentic, it is up to us to then put together a proposal that brings that to life. And as you said, there can be a lot of sort of, marketing can be very data heavy at times. It can be very analytical, but anybody can put a stack of numbers in front of you. There has to be a story to it. These people are coming to us, these brands are coming to us because we're storytellers, and they are expecting us to lean on that skill. So it's our job to bring this story to life in the presentation. How are we going to work together? What's the story we're looking to tell? How are we going to help you reach the people you're looking to reach in creative and innovative ways? And so we have to be captivating. We have to be compelling, like right on the page, because if we're not compelling there, it's certainly, that's the idea will die right there on the page if it's not capturing their attention, if it's not engaging them. So yeah, absolutely. We do have to lean on creativity and on our writing skills a great deal to take these sort of hard facts and spin them into a story that really, captures their attention and makes it feel like an opportunity that they can't walk away from.
Absolutely. And I think that is what the right marketing does. It captures our attention and it stays with us long after the campaign is over. And so now that we know what it is that you do, and we're moving like deeply into your role, can you maybe talk about, just so we get a better understanding of what happens in real time, can you talk about a specific project that maybe you helped launch that you're really proud of, and maybe go into the details of like giving us the timeline, like this is how fast paced it is, or just so we can understand what it really looks like?
So, there are several projects from over the last several years that I'm really proud of. And what's hilarious is that I'm going to use a fairly old example because it's one that I'm particularly proud of. Back when I was working at Lifetime, we were in a pretty uncommon position where we had the head of our department basically gathered everybody together and said, like, I'm going to start what's essentially called this golden ticket initiative. And in that sense, come to me and bring me an idea, whatever the idea is. Like, come to me and bring me an idea, and if it has merit and I feel like there's potential there, we will give you a certain amount of money to pursue it and see what comes of it. I cannot remember how much money that was, but it wasn't a lot. So at the time I was very close with one of the creative directors in social media, and one of our jobs was to sort of, be very cognizant of what we had on the network and what the network was attempting to do. And on Lifetime, I'm sure most people know one of their like biggest properties, their biggest franchises are their like Saturday night original movie premieres. And these movies tend to be a little campy. They tend to be a little over the top. They're not exactly taking home any Golden Globes, but they're fun and people have fun watching them. And if you monitor social chatter around them, you notice very quickly that there was, a particular audience that loved these movies, that perhaps loved these movies with a glass of wine or something, that, that helped enhance the viewing experience. So we thought to ourselves, like, okay, there's a party happening here and we're not part of it yet, but we could be. So, we came up with an idea essentially to create a short form like content franchise where we would film these sort of interstitials that would air like as you were coming out of the movie, going into a commercial block, or coming out of a commercial block and back into the movie, where we had a host and she was mixing a drink, and perhaps the drink was themed to the movie, and she was maybe poking fun at the movie a little bit, maybe ribbing it a little bit, but interacting with the audience, making it a little bit of a party. And in that way, we felt like, we'll finally not only be able to like be in on the joke, but we can perhaps even have, a stake in directing that narrative and owning the joke, if, should one exist. So we got the green light and immediately had to start putting this together. And we didn't obviously have a lot of time because we were working with, all of a sudden we had to figure out so many different things. We had to figure out how many of these movies we had already banked that we could, watch and get approved and get to like the talent that we were going to use on screen so that they could watch it. We worked with a comedian who happened to be a friend of my colleague, and she was game for the idea because why not? She was going to get paid and she was going to get to make fun of movies and drink a little bit. So we turned these around very quickly. I think we filmed enough for 3 movies within a day. We had like 1 day to shoot all of these. We had to find a location. We had to find a production company that, would fit within our budget and all of that. And we had a great time. And once they began to air, we monitored the social chatter, and it seemed like there was a pretty positive response to the creation of this franchise that we called Mixologist in a Movie. And the reason why I tell this particular story is once those 3 aired, we had kind of utilized the majority of the budget that we had been given. But out of nowhere, we got approached by our integrated marketing department, and they asked us like, hey, this is really cool. Like, is there a way we could integrate a partner into this? Is there a way we could perhaps pitch this and include this in our pitches going out to market? We didn't set out to create that. We just set out to create a fun little short form series. But all of a sudden, the marketing team thought, we can sell this somehow. And sure enough, within a very short amount of time, they brought on a partner that was like very excited about being integrated into the pieces. And immediately the process began again, where we had to find these films. We had to, I'm sitting there on my little computer scripting out these interstitial pieces, working with our talent who was also contributing her own ideas, making sure that we were, creating copy that felt funny, that still felt like it was organic to this franchise that we had created, but that also was, including all of the messaging points that this client was looking to do. It was a restaurant client at the time. And we had to turn around and film it very fast. And all of a sudden you're working with food stylists and finding out that pretty much any food that's filmed is not edible. It may look great, but it is not at all edible. And I wouldn't suggest anybody try to eat food that's been photographed. But it turned into a franchise that actually became like a marketing product. And we didn't, as I said, we didn't set out to do that. But what it taught me was that if you're so moved by an idea, by a concept, develop it. And if it's marketable, if it's sellable, like that will reveal itself in ways that you didn't necessarily anticipate. Much in the same way that Pfizer set out to create blood pressure medicine and they wound up with Viagra. Sometimes you set out to make one thing and you wind up making something completely different. But I mean, I've done countless things since then with much bigger budgets, but I'm, very proud of that particular project because we were scrappy. We were surviving on just our whims and our wiles, and we wound up turning out something that was really cool, and that was a major learning experience.
Wow. So it seems like, yeah, you're right. Like things can get a bit unexpected and unpredictable, but the key is to really just like implement your ideas and develop them. Something like you really mentioned, you said we were monitoring the social chatter. I think you said that a few times. Is that how you measure a success, like success of a campaign? What are some things that you take into consideration when you look at a campaign and you're like, okay, this is probably a successful one? How much of data is involved in that? How much of that is like, qualitative research?
It's a good question, and there's not an easy answer to that. I guess one of the easiest answers is, did the partner renew? Did they come back? Like, were they so moved and were they so happy with the product you turned out that they came back immediately and said, yes, we want to do this again. We want to do it bigger and better. That's one way to certainly measure a successful campaign. But when it comes to integrated marketing, one luxury is that efficacy is both quantifiable and qualifiable, but it depends on what their goal, like the partner's goals were, and were you able to deliver against them. So, were they looking to reach a certain number of viewers? There are a host of measurement tools at our disposal that can prove out if that was achieved. We can pull together studies and surveys if they were looking to shift public perception or increase their favorability. We work with research groups that are able to access that kind of data, aggregate it, and put it together in a way that we can very, succinctly prove out that we reached the goals that they were looking to hit. And then there's just earned media coverage. Sometimes partners are looking to make a splash in a pretty noisy landscape. And if we can manage to execute something that, turns the right amount of heads, gains word of mouth, like you said, social chatter, or even gathers organic coverage in industry periodicals like Adweek. We might not be able to enumerate those sorts of returns in the same way that, you can't quantify celebrity, but there is a lot to be said to architecting something that gets people talking.
Amazing. And it also sounds like in this kind of a role, you do have to work cross-functionally. So maybe can you also talk about a time where you had to work with different departments and how you managed that? How did you navigate those relationships as a marketing professional?
Oh man, let me tell you, it is all about cross-functional work. It is all about cross-functional work, especially in execution. So when I was at NBC and I was working on American Ninja Warrior, cross-function began from day one. So if you had a brand that expressed interest in Ninja, the first step was to go to the programming executives to vet the brand, to make sure that they were even okay with working with them. And then if they were okay, one of the big partners that we had when I was working there at the time, I don't believe they're a partner anymore, but at the time, Palm Wonderful, the pomegranate juice, was a huge partner with American Ninja Warrior. And they had exposure everywhere. They had they had physical branding in the bleachers, they had physical branding on the obstacles, they had, in-show segments that we would film. So for stuff like physical branding, I had to work with art directors to create those physical assets. I had to work with the production team to make sure that the footage that we needed of those assets was being captured. We'd have to work with the digital and social teams to ensure that graphics were, produced and integrated, and that the content was posted and distributed where it was supposed to be. And you're also working with the brand. All of these elements that you're creating have to be vetted with them for approval before they can be finalized, before they can be locked. And, as far as how you navigate these different relationships, these interpersonal, extrapersonal relationships, you do it professionally, but you also kind of do it as a UN translator. I mean, you will have a different cadence with all of these different people. You're going to have a different cadence with your external client than you do with an internal colleague, like a programming executives. But you can be collegial and direct with your internal colleagues in ways that you have to be perhaps a little bit more professional, a little bit more delicate when you're working with partners. But often you have to cut through a lot of fat to get to whatever the direct question a partner is posing. But by having that understanding, how you communicate it back to the internal partners that you work with to help you develop solutions. But yeah, especially, I can't speak for other departments, but especially for the department that I sit in, that I work in, we are certainly not an island. And the interpersonal relationships that we have with our other lines of business and our partners is crucial.
Amazing. So now I think we have got a good understanding of what the role entails. I think, definitely when we present ourselves in a job interview, talking about the times that we work cross-functionally on our initiative, the times that we developed our own idea into something special, maybe those are some things that we can bring to the forefront as we are entering the industry and interviewing. And so now I definitely want to move the conversation into the industry and how to get started. So why don't we talk about, what are some challenges that you faced as a young professional when you were starting out, maybe during networking, interviewing sessions? Like, what are some things that you thought, were a little difficult starting out?
So I wouldn't say that the major challenges were with the actual application process as much as it was like once you landed that job.
Mm.
I'll say this. One of the biggest difficulties you'll probably face as like an entry level or like a junior level employee is that people have an unfortunate tendency to equate pay scale with legitimacy. You may be eager, you may want to contribute an idea in a conversation, and you may even do so and feel like the general response is, oh, how cute. This person had an idea. What a lovely thing. Let me pat them on the head and let's move on. And to some extent, there's no avoiding that. But that doesn't mean that you don't contribute. Contribute wherever you can. You will find inevitably the people who are receptive and who make it known that you'd like to help. And these are the people who will empower you and champion you and create opportunities for you. So I think in terms of like the actual application process and the interview process, it is a little bit universal no matter what kind of a job you're looking for. When you get in, it can be a little bit tough. What I will also say is that when you are thinking about, when you're having these conversations and when you're interviewing for jobs, no experience is irrelevant. Okay, if you are trying to break into media and perhaps you don't have a media background, that doesn't necessarily mean that the experience that you do have at other jobs isn't relevant to the situation. When you're interviewing positions, it's accepted that you are not an expert in this field. That's how you become an expert, is by getting these jobs. But there are other skills that you can leverage. There are situations that you can repurpose in these conversations that are extremely relevant to the dialogue. I mean, when I got my first job, when I got that ad sales job at A&E, like I didn't have really much media experience outside of my undergrad, but I had worked for several years as a server. I had worked for several years in the hospitality industry, and there were huge components to that job that were client facing. I was dealing with agencies and clients pretty much all day, having to make sure that, I had to field several requests, which were, very easy for them to make, but perhaps not so easy for me to execute internally. But it was because I had that experience, in client relations, working face to face with, guests and clients at these, previous employers, that I was able to not only speak to that experience and make it sound relevant and feel relevant within the context of media, but I was able to prove that out once I was in the job. And it was actually much later on that I found out that the person who had hired me essentially hired me because he found out that I worked at Disney and told me, well, if you can handle those people, you can handle any one of my clients. So that's truly what I will say. Like, I know it can feel intimidating, and I know that there's always that cliche of you need the experience to get the job, but you can't get the job if you don't have the experience. No experience is irrelevant. So don't count yourself out because you may not feel like you don't have a particular media centric answer to a question from a media, prospective media employee. It doesn't matter. Just show what you can do, show that you've been able to learn from past experience, talk about how you might apply those skills in this job, and that you're eager to learn.
Absolutely. And so when we're starting out with this process, how important of a role does networking play? How important is, building relationships with people online, reaching out to them via LinkedIn? What are some tips and advice that you have on that front for us?
The limit does not exist, to borrow a line from Katie Heron in Mean Girls. The limit does not exist when it comes to the importance of networking and building relationships. And I know it's easy to say that without explaining the how of it, but truly interpersonal relationships can be definitive factors when it comes to your mobility. And I know for some people like me, it can often be exhausting to set meetings and to have conversations and to wade through small talk. But the truth remains that connections can and will open doors for you. Like I said, when I applied for my first job in media, I applied cold via their website, and I was brought in because my resume happened to list Disney, which happened to be their parent company. But the HR rep told me point blank, most of our hires are internal referrals. And sure enough, the people that I met in that job were instrumental in me landing the next one. So connections don't always have to be in person. You can strike up a relationship that's purely email based, but if the dialogue is ongoing, you develop a rapport and it becomes more familiar. I mean, that is how trust is developed and how someone figures out who you are and what you're good at. But what I will say is this: you have to maintain that relationship. Don't just make a connection to increase your follower account, to increase your connection account. Like, unless you plan to invest in that relationship, the connection itself is not worth much. Because if this professional on the inside sees somebody who's looking to make a connection with them, and the whole, like, the meat of your conversation is just solicitous, it's just about what can you do for me? How can you help me? They're gonna tune out very quickly. But if you're earnest and you appeal to this person because they happen to have done work that has moved you, or that has captivated you, or they happen to work for an organization that you have a large affinity for, speak to those things. Like, seek to get to know this person as an actual human being. And you don't have to reach out to them every week, especially if you have nothing substantial or significant to really say, but keep those lines of communication open. Check in from time to time, because you never know how quickly things can change from month to month, from week to week. And all of a sudden, like, as long as you stay within this person's periphery, they're more apt to remember you and to think about you when opportunities come up and make you aware of them. So yes, the short answer to your question that I just answered in a very long-winded way is that yes, interpersonal relationships and networking is very important, but at the same time, like, don't burn yourself out trying to meet everybody under the sun, because for every 10 cold call emails you send out, maybe 2 will respond.
Yeah, absolutely. And earlier you also spoke about doing lots of part-time jobs, doing internships during your undergrad. Can you also talk a little bit more about that? Like, how do students go about picking internships? Like you said, no experience is irrelevant. So yeah, just like how do we go about deciding, like, okay, this is probably the most relevant? So yeah, how do we go about picking that? Because sometimes people do have a lot of opportunities out there. So how do we decide that?
Start with your professors. Start with your professors or your teaching advisors. These are often professionals in the field who already know you to some extent as individuals, and they may actually have an idea already of somewhere or someone to whom they can direct you. Outside of that, there are a myriad of connective resources at your disposal that grads years ago just did not have. I mean, yes, there is LinkedIn, but there's also social media. Platforms like Twitter and Instagram offer a level of unprecedented access to professionals that used to be unthinkable. Many of these folks you can either tag in a post or you can DM them directly. So I would say, again, to kind of reiterate myself a little bit from earlier, identify creators or creative houses that are of interest to you and look them up. Shoot them a message. Be judicious, be purposeful, don't spam the entire Rolodex at Paramount. That probably won't get you anywhere, but be thoughtful in your message and be personal. Speak to yourself, speak to why that publisher or creative house or creative person is so significant to you. Don't send a book, and don't copy and paste some stale form letter. And don't speak to an agenda, even if you have one. Just come across as a genuine person that is genuinely interested in this individual place. And if you come through as sincere, that will increase your odds at making a connection. Yes, again, 8 out of 10 emails will probably go unanswered, but I tell you, you will be shocked at who actually does wind up replying.
Yeah, absolutely. And so as students go around uh doing these internships, what are some skills that we should focus on building? Maybe hard skills, soft skills, like what are some things that a marketer should have as a skill set moving into the role?
I mean, as far as like transferable skills, I mean, I think just you need to be flexible in like whatever your starting point is. You need to be malleable. Like again, when you're coming into a media position, you may not necessarily have the specific a honed set of skills that an experienced marketer has. I still don't after 10 plus years of working in this industry, because everything changes so fast. You're consistently having to learn about new platforms. You're consistently having to learn about different ways of consuming media. The way that people consume it linearly when they watch like standard cable television and watch TV in a linear fashion is entirely different from the way they stream it, whether it's on platform or via YouTube, which is entirely different from the way they consume content digitally on their phones. So I mean, absolutely for sure, just try to keep abreast of developments in the field of different, ad products, different, like different creative houses, like continue to consume content, absolutely, because we are inevitably marketing ourselves to consumers, so we need to understand the way that people are watching. But as far as just like your base level skills, it's just again, as I said, marketing is a lot of interpersonal and extrapersonal communication. So being able to manage relationships, I think, is major. I mean, just absolutely major, because you will at one time or another have like 9-10 people talking in your ear about one particular project. Everybody's going to want to have like their say. Everybody's going to want to put their mark on things, and to be able to distill all of that to manage those relationships in a way that everybody feels heard, that everybody feels respected, is a lot easier said than done. I would also just say one skill that I really wish everybody hung on to, from the most junior to the most senior employee, is receptivity. It's not as prevalent as you think it is. On the brand side of things, you have to be receptive to a brand goals and their identity. If you have a great idea for an activation that's humorous, say, in tone, but is entirely at odds with the image that brand or client is attempting to set, it may be a great idea, but all the brand is going to see is somebody who didn't pay attention. Internally, be receptive to other ideas and to feedback on your own. I mean, no man is an island, and people may really surprise you with contributions that you could have never known were there, and they may vastly improve upon what you're building. So just remain open, remain receptive, like be eager to learn, like be eager to contribute. I mean, those are really your basic set of skills, and a lot of it you will learn as you go.
Yeah, absolutely. And you did also mention staying abreast with the news, or knowing what the trends are in the industry. How do you do that? How do you ensure that you know what's going on? Because there's just so much changing every day. So like, do you follow a newsletter? Like, what do you do to just like stay informed?
There are several things you can do. First of all, you can read publications like Adweek or DigiDay, which cover probably best-in-class examples of creative marketing and innovations in the field. Job-wise, like if you're in the midst of your job search, I definitely recommend signing up for the Synopsis newsletter, CYNOPSIS. They offer several different newsletters that cover things like esports, media tech, and there's one specifically for jobs that comes out weekly. And that is an incredible resource if you are looking for jobs in the media field. Other than that, it's a boring answer. I'm going to repeat myself, but consume. Watch linear TV, watch streaming, notice the difference in the ad formats and the marketing approaches, listen to podcasts, have a working knowledge of the most highly trafficked social platforms. I'm not saying you need to be an active user of every platform under the sun. That would be anarchy, but try to get a base level understanding of each, how they work, what makes them distinct, who makes up the majority of their user base. It's very easy to get caught up in all of this, like it's a race, but just pace yourself and just make room for, just the things that you love to do. Make peace with the idea that there will always be somebody out there who knows more about something than you do, but odds are there's something that you know more about something than that person does. So in the words of Ron Swanson from Parks and Rec, don't half-ass two things, whole-ass one thing.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. We will definitely keep in mind all of the sources that you mentioned, and I'm definitely going to watch out for synopsis. I really am going to read that frequently. So thank you for that. I would also like to hear from you your speculation about the industry. How do you see it evolving in the next, say, 5 years? A lot of people have been talking about the rise of artificial intelligence. And how do you see the interaction between creatives and AI, which is talk of the town these days? But just in general, what are some speculations that you have about the industry?
I can't say too much about AI because it's still fairly new when it comes to just like AI artwork and AI writing. I will say I'm highly skeptical of it. I think that it could perhaps be very beneficial in certain ways, like if you are, perhaps trying to take a large amount of information and distill it down, summarize it, maybe that can be a helpful tool. Other than that, like writing from scratch using AI, there's no magic in that. I just truly don't know if it'll ever be able to truly like replicate somebody's voice, to replicate like the humanity that is behind these words. As a technical tool, I believe that there, will be a use for it, but as a creative tool, I remain dubious. As far as the way that the industry is changing, it's changing and it's not. I mean, the way we consume content, the way that we watch content is ever shifting, but the fact remains that there will always be some level of marketing and some level of advertising there, because that is how these publishers keep the lights on. It's how they make money. I mean, you even see now subscription-based creative houses like Netflix and Disney Plus adding ad-supported models that didn't exist before, because the level of subscribers is either leveling off or dwindling, and people are realizing, especially with the way that the economy currently sits, that there are people out there that are just willing to put up with ads if it allows them to, if it allows them entry to the content they love at a lower price point. So there are still going to be ways for advertisers to reach the audiences that they're looking to reach. It'll just be different. There's also fast, free ad-supported television, which you see in the likes of Tubi and Freevee, which is essentially just a different kind of cable TV. It's a different kind of linear viewing apparatus. Like if you go on any of these apps, they are indeed free. You can find a smattering of, God knows, anywhere from like 30 to 50 channels that are airing live that you can watch live. And the reason it's free is because they're ads. It's just, you're watching a different way and you're not watching a different way. It's just almost like a digital version of the way that people watched TV 10, 15, 20 years ago. So the mode of like delivery of these of marketing campaigns and marketing executions is different, but there will always be a need for it. And brands will always need to find a way to reach their clientele or their prospective clientele, I should say, because otherwise they would be screaming in a vacuum. The reason why they come and they partner with the likes of Warner Brothers Discovery and all of the, the publishing houses out there, is because of the content we create and the foothold that we have with these audiences. We are the point of entry. We deliver, messaging and clout that they couldn't otherwise do if they were just to film creative and pop it on a YouTube channel. So yes, the industry is absolutely evolving, and yet that evolution is really just manifesting in the sense that, as I said, the means of delivery may change, but there will always be a need to deliver, at least as I see it, and to find ways to allow brands and partners to, access potential, their potential fans and consumers.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you know, I want to also open up this stage for Q&A. I do want to ask you, as a last question from my end, a little bit about your book. So I'm Never Fine. It is a really anticipated book. BuzzFeed's talking about this. Can you tell us a little bit about it? Also like about your writing process, how you went about writing it, what is it about, and yeah, when will it be out?
So the book is out next month. It's out on February 21st. The book actually started during my MFA program. Funnily enough, life just has a funny way of revealing to you who you are without even knowing it. When I entered my MFA, the writing sample that I provided was a fiction writing sample. I believed to my core that I was a fiction writer. And my very first semester, I took a class with a professor who taught about the lyric essay, which was something that I was wholly unfamiliar with, as well as, essentially being unfamiliar with the genre of creative nonfiction as a whole. And from day one, I was just enamored with it. I mean, I was exposed to writers like, like Joan Didion and John DeGata and all of these people who had a way of like taking their life and the way that they viewed the world and writing it in this way that borrowed like poetic elements and, even elements of dramatization that I didn't even think it was possible to like take your own story and write it in such a compelling way. And as part of the final project for that class, I had to write my own lyric essay, not knowing really what to write about. I borrowed a vignette, I guess, as you can say, from, a period of my life from several years ago that was, pretty tumultuous. And I realized at the end of that writing experience that I was able to gain some perspective and kind of process a part of my life and a part of my history that I had never processed before, simply through the writing experience. Mm-hmm. And as the MFA went on, and I took classes in various disciplines in poetry and fiction, and even a bit of like playwriting and screenwriting, I kept realizing that everything that I wrote more or less was inspired by this particular period of my life, to the point where when it came time to write my thesis, I already had about 5 or 6 essays all sort of circling this one topic that I realized very quickly there's something to be written here. And so I chose to do my thesis in creative nonfiction. I chose to write, a collection of essays because my thesis was, the product of my thesis was supposed to be a full-length manuscript. So I spent the better part of a year plus fleshing out and, adding material and writing and cutting and editing. And I wound up with just that. I wound up with a full-length manuscript that was somehow about my life, that was somehow against all odds readable. And after I graduated, I continued working on it, and I decided that, I really felt like there was something there. I really felt like there was something worth sharing. And so immediately, once I was past the grad school of it all, I began submitting it to different publishers, to different agents, while continuing to work on it, while continuing to revise it. And it took about a year and a half. But a press, a small, lovely indie press expressed, an interest in it, asked me to share the whole thing. and picked it up in July of last year, or no, I'm sorry, July of 2021. And I didn't really begin working on it in earnest with my editor until May of this year. But it's really been kind of a whirlwind. I certainly didn't expect to, I don't necessarily know if I even expected it to get picked up, and the fact that it did, and the fact that I've been able to, share it with some of these creators who have inspired me, and even, somehow get noticed by BuzzFeed and get, listed amongst those other incredibly talented authors who have books coming out this year, is a distinction I don't think I could have even have fathomed, a year and a half ago. And the journey continues because I've got, 3.5, 4 weeks until this thing comes out, and I'm sitting here slightly terrified. But it's yeah, I'm a little bit dumbfounded. I wish I had a more eloquent answer for that one, but I'm still living the experience as we go.
Wow. No, we are all very excited about it, and we'll definitely keep an eye out for the book around the release date. With that being said, I'm opening the floor for Q&A. Guys, feel free to unmute yourself and just ask your questions.
And if you don't have any, I could do a really funny dance. No.
I was wondering a bit about Place. You had mentioned that there's a lot of marketing agencies out in New York City, but can you see yourself anywhere else professionally?
I can see myself everywhere else. I can see myself every time I visit a new city. I feel like I can see myself there in some way, shape, or form. I think, honestly, I kind of feel like we have learned from the last 2 years that, a good amount of this work doesn't necessarily need to be done in a central location. A lot of the people that I work with throughout the pandemic relocated from the Metro New York area. Some moved to Boston, some left LA and moved to San Diego, but they remain at the company because, there's just, with the click of a button and the enter of a password, you have access to essentially all of these, these software systems and hardware systems that you need to do your job. So I think that there's probably still a reluctance out there from, upper brass at a lot of companies to, go full remote. But I think that the fact that that largely the hybrid work environment exists now does allow people to perhaps, do their work from a location that, they otherwise would not have been able to pre, 2020. So as far as myself, I could see myself in Chicago. I could see myself in Sicily, God knows, but we'll see. We'll see where the future takes me.
Another question that I also had as like somebody who's interested in marketing was how important is an agency experience? Like I hear from a lot of people is that when you're starting out, if you work for an agency, it can be really helpful to experience all of these different industries and these kinds of like different clients. So how would you value that kind of an experience as compared to like in-house marketing?
They're different and the same. Like when you're working for a media agency or a creative agency, you're still working for, a Rolodex of clients. It's just a different type of work. So one of the major functions of like media agency is to sort of be the mouthpiece for these like partners and whatnot. They will come to you. You will be their first point of contact. You will be the one to whom, they relay all of the information about what their outlook is for the next year, what their campaign might be, who they're looking to reach. And then again, it falls upon you to take that information and to build out these creative briefs that are then shared with publishers like, the Paramounts and the Warner Brothers Discoveries of it all. I think truly it certainly does not work against you, because much in the same way that, we have to internally when you're working at an agency, you have to rely on a specific set of skills, one of them being adaptability. When you are crafting a creative brief that you're going to send out to 1,000 publishers and you're doing it for Rolex, it's going to have a completely different vibe, a completely different voice, a completely different tone than you would be if you were making one for Arby's. And you are not going to have just one client. You're probably going to be juggling, anywhere from 4 to 5, if not more. And so your ability to switch between these different mindsets because you may have a 9 a.m. meeting where you're talking about Arby's, and then you may have a noon meeting where you're talking about Rolex, and each of these different partners or clients, they have a different set of goals. They have, you'll learn very quickly how to communicate with these people in the same way that I told you would learn how you would communicate with your partners internally at a publisher and externally as a publisher. So I certainly couldn't devalue the agency experience. I myself have always been on the publisher side of things. But working with agencies is a huge part of what I do. And so they're, at least now, a pretty vital part of our art day to day. So you'll learn a lot very quickly about what it is to work. When you work at an agency, you'll learn a lot about what it's like to work with both brands and publishers at the same time.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Joseph, for all of the amazing tips and advice that we got. If you don't have any other questions, then we can wrap it up now. And thank you so much for just joining us. It's been very, very helpful learning about your role, your experiences, and we're also hoping to stay in touch with you. So would you, do you prefer LinkedIn for us to stay connected?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on LinkedIn for sure. There's also a way to communicate with me via my website, which is just, www.josephlezza.com. I'm also on pretty much, well, not every social media platform, but I'm on at least the big ones, the Instagrams and the Twitters of the world. So I'm pretty easy to find.
Amazing. So we'll definitely keep in touch. Thank you so much, Joseph, for taking the time and talking to us today. It was very, very helpful. And thank you so much, everybody, for being here.
No, thanks for having me.
Of course.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye, Joseph.
Bye.
This is great.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.